Welcome to the latest edition of Scotch and Watch. This is where we talk about the collision of big media and big tech with a little bit of AI thrown in. And ultimately, it's all about calling BS where it's due. And there's a ton of it right now in our market. I don't know if we're going to get to. Hang on, let's just reel them off. Who's had a good week this week, Chris? It's not been a great week for Apple.
No.
Not great. Not a great week for, hang on, what are they called again? I can't remember. They used to be that. Oh, that's right. Google, those guys. Remember them? Yeah. You can laugh, Chris. I remember when we were doing this the other day and you totally forgot Apple was one of the big tech companies.
One of the big seven, yeah.
Yeah, in fairness, okay. It's not been a great week for Meta. Yeah. So it's not been ideal. But for the first time, we have, and I'm giving it a moment, we have some Substack royalty joining us today. Last week, I saw a name pop up in the people watching the show. It was none other than Graham Lovelace. And I was like, not that one, surely. And it is. It's him himself. So, Graham, introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are. Tell everybody who would be mad enough not to already know who you are.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Ricky. And hi, Chris. I'm a journalist and editor for the last, 41 years, would you believe? Last week you talked about you both bring 25 years, so that's 50 years experience. I'm now rounding up to 91 years between the three of us anyway.
We should charge for this.
Yeah. You say Substack royalty. Well, I think you're definitely the king, Ricky. So about a year and a half ago, I was subscribing to you. I was subscribing to several other Substacks and starting to understand how you could actually create an audience using this platform. I fell into writing about the impacts of AI on what I call human-made media. So anything which involves a human brain, a human hand to craft information, tell stories, illustrate, translate, all of that stuff, and the impacts that generative AI is having on individuals, individual professions, and companies as well, publishers around the world. So I started writing about it. I started to research it. That's the first thing I did. That actually took 6 months because I knew that if I was going to go into this area as a journalist, you had to know as much about it as the techies. You had to know as much about it as the business people that I was going to be really taking on and attacking. And that's what I do. So it's mission-led journalism. I am telling the story of the generative AI revolution from the perspective of the creative industries, the perspective of creators, who, let's face it, are having a really hard time of it now. But there's another generation coming through that are using the tools. They don't see what's wrong with using tools, which are obviously based on copyright infringed information, which has gone into these huge training models. And they're embracing the future. So we've got this chasm going on within media, as we had really in the early days of the web. You know, my boss at the Daily Mail, Sir David English, when I was running Teletext Limited, remember that? He was wedded to print, he was wedded to paper, ink on paper, but he was fascinated with where this newfangled web thing was going to go. So I was very much the change agent within that organization, trying to work out where it was all heading. And that felt scary at the time, but my God, this is crazy.
Yeah, I imagine that. So what you're basically saying is that some people in the tech industry are stealing content created by the people that write it.
Absolutely. Which
does the world know about this?
I don't think the world knows enough about it, Ricky. I don't think enough people understand it. So again, back in the early days of the web, we had this phrase called digital literacy, and we never got that right. It was explaining how you'd find information, the provenance of information, could you trust it? If you saw something, and then obviously as information started to flow across smartphones and we started to get more into the world of social media, again, digital literacy, were you going to believe that particular thing on Facebook, whatever it was? We never got that right as a nation. We never got that right as a world. As humanity, we never really understood enough about information sources. And so, again, a generation has grown up thinking that if it's on your phone, it must be right. They don't understand that BBC News is a source, that we would check things against 3 known sources. None of that goes on. And now we're in this new world of AI literacy, which is even worse, because you've got to explain how the models work, that they're trained on data, that much of that data has been scraped from the open web, And then you get all of these excuses that the AI companies are using for that huge industrial scale theft. And we're going through this period as well, where the AI literacy, it's people in publishing, it's people in our own industry that are all at sea. But my God, politicians are clueless on both sides of the Atlantic. So part of my newsletter as well is explaining what's going on for policymakers. I've got a lot of them on it, and some who are really trying to do things, like Baroness Kidron, for instance. I got an exclusive quote from her overnight on something coming up in the UK Parliament next week. There's a key vote, which could set the tone for where the UK government is going. We can talk on that shortly. So we've got politicians that are all at sea, but teachers in schools, school kids, our own families. You will start to hear it's on ChatGPT, therefore it must be true. They don't understand that these models are massively biased because of the training data that's gone into them. They hallucinate. That's a feature of machine learning that no one can do anything about. The fact that the very biggest and best computer scientists don't really know what goes on inside a large language model. You can't interrogate it. You can't walk inside. You can't check the information. But I come back to the ethics and the behavior, which again is what you guys talk about a lot, and we'll touch on later with the major trials. And that is, again, the massively unethical way that these guys have gone about this. They could have done this properly 3 years ago. They could have done this with the consent and authorization of the world of content creators and publishers, but they didn't. They just took. And that has left this idea that is now thrown into this AI supremacy in the States, that this tech exceptionalism, that these organizations, these companies are just too big and too important to tell what to do. They're too big and too important to regulate. We just got to let them get on with their own thing, because they're going to lead us to this mythical new phase of this technology known as artificial general intelligence. AI as smart as you and I. And it's a myth. Using the large language models that are currently being used, they will never, ever get that. I can come back to why that's the case later.
All right. Go on, Chris.
I was going to say, but the most important thing, Graham, is you can't let China not get there first.
Which is one of my 24 copyright deniers bingo card things, which I did 2 weeks ago. Exactly that.
Coincidentally, I went to see my MP this week in Parliament for following up on when the AI consultation happened here, and there was a petition went out which thousands, millions of people filled in, because basically Elton John and Paul McCartney were on side, and you cannot in Britain be against McCartney and Elton. And I filled in my version of the petition, which went to my local MP, and I got a kind of pro forma answer back. And I sat there thinking exactly the same thing, Greg, which was, I wonder if Clive Jones is my local MP, Lib Dem, just been elected, the first Lib Dem MP in where I live ever. I was like, I wonder what Clive actually understands about this and thinks about it. And so I got in touch and said, I'll come in and see it. I had a very, very good chat with him. But it's exactly the point that you made. He's looking at the Kidron amendments, which are going through Parliament next week, and they're complex and they have implications, and they're sort of not a life's work maybe, but a good sort of, you have to sit down for a good amount of time and understand exactly what's being debated here. He's a very smart man, but he doesn't come from a background in AI tech. And he's being asked as one of the kind of 600 MPs in the UK to kind of vote on this. Interestingly, what he did absolutely get was the music side, because for some reason, to your point about AI literacy, the music copyright seems very easy for people to grasp. You can't steal the Beatles. People get that immediately. But copying text-written video, audio, kind of, and ingesting it into these models seems much harder to understand. So I think the point on literacy is well made.
Could you explain for the audience these provisions, these Kidron provisions, because they're a UK initiative rather than a global one. So for people that aren't UK centric, could you just explain?
Yeah, gladly. We've got two things happening at the same time, Ricky. We've got the consultation that Chris Dennard mentioned this before. So here's the massive consultation document that the government.
Could you send me a copy? Oh no, actually, don't worry. You keep it. You do it. Yeah,
I'm still a print it out and read guy. I'm not very good. Yes, we got the consultation that the government launched in just before Christmas. They did that deliberately. Obviously, they had Christmas and New Year, so it was essentially an 8-week consultation. But that closed on February 25th this year. And in that consultation document, the government said that its preferred option was to allow AI companies to scrape at will unless copyright holders actually reserved an option to opt out, something called reserved rights. The creative community immediately said, well, we don't know how to do that. There is no tool or technology which allows us to know who has scraped what and how we actually opt out. It also runs absolutely in the face of what copyright is. So this is the problem, isn't it, Chris? You then got to explain what copyright is to MPs and other people. So copyright has been around in this country, in the UK, for 310 years. Under the Berne Convention, which was, is a century old in its own right. It's an automatic right. Anything that we do as creatives, anything which captures the expression of an idea, not the idea itself, but the expression of the idea, is instantly and automatically copyrightable. So expecting creators to then do something flies in the face of that international convention, because in order to protect my copyright, I've now got to physically do something. Now, in the States, there's a doctrine under the US Copyright Act called fair use.
Oh, yes.
And it's a 4-point doctrine which courts decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not something infringes copyright. And buried within that doctrine is something called, is the need to look at whether there was a transformative use of the information, that something transformative came out as a result. And that's the argument which is being used by the AI company. They openly admit scraping and copying. They say they can't do this without this copyrighted material. But it's protected under fair use. And that's the basis of the 40 plus court cases now making their way through the US. Another one this week, Ziff Davis, the publisher, suing OpenAI. Very, very similar case to the best known one, which is the New York Times versus OpenAI and Microsoft. Two major allegations there. Obviously, just exactly what I'm saying. Copyright content has been scraped without authorization or consent. And then, very importantly, to use and to create substitutive products. Yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily need to go to the New York Times or a Ziff Davis publication like Mashable or PC Mag, or even buy a subscription. You would just go to ChatGPT or any other chatbot and get that information, which, by the way, is behind a paywall. So that's the fear that in time these substituted products would actually replace. Christy,
Ziff Davis is interesting because Ziff Davis is open web, so it's free content on the internet published by Ziff Davis on the basis that you can access it on their sites. So you've got it's the first case here where they're saying just the fact. So one of the arguments is, hey, look, you put it out there, you put it out there on the web, therefore it's fair game. And the Ziff Davis case is really important to say, actually, no, we published that with a set of terms and conditions with copyright protection. Our choice is to make it open because we have an advertising model. That does not mean that you can just take it and use it for whatever purpose you define. That's not how the internet should work. So Ziff Davis, I think, is interesting in a very kind of open web world. New York Times then is the classic kind of we're behind a paywall. You shouldn't be able to do this anyway. And that both those cases are running through the US courts kind of at the same time.
So what happened was we had the situation where, given that fair use in the States, the AI companies about 2 years ago, particularly led by Google, started to write to governments around the world and said, we want this loose arrangement which we have in the US, which is not settled, hasn't been contested, etc. But we believe this is the way it's going to go. And if you want a data center in your country, or maybe 100 data centers in your country, which we may well pay for, you need to dilute your copyright laws. So the UK, there is no fair use. We have something in journalism called fair dealing, if you remember, where you're writing a restaurant review, or if you're writing a theatre review, that sort of thing, you can only take so much of the information. You're writing a book review, you can't copy the whole thing verbatim, that sort of thing. But that's nothing to do with fair use. What we have in the UK is an opt-in arrangement. So everything is protected, absolutely gold standard copyright protection. Everything's protected. If you want to train your model on any content in the UK, you need a license. Okay, so the government is proposing that there is this opt-out for creators that they can opt out of something. Baroness Kidron in the House of Lords, there was a piece of legislation which started off in the House of Lords called the Data Access and Use Bill. Let's just call it the Data Bill. And she put down a number of amendments which the Lords passed. And that was to actually strengthen and safeguard existing copyright laws so that the scraper bots had to be identifiable, that creators had to be alerted if their content had been taken. And it essentially created the beginnings of what could become a licensing regime. Now, that bill then started off in the Lords, made its way into the Commons, and in committee, all of the Kidron amendments were removed by a Labour-led committee, with obviously the Labour government with a very large majority. The Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle, here has been, accused of essentially being in the tech lobby camp, that he's going to be drinking the Kool-Aid of the Googles, etc., and has been going along with this idea that we have to have these companies doing the processing, the AI model creation in our country if we want to somehow protect copyright in the UK. And again, the creators say that's fine, but it's happened. The idea of having hundreds of data centers here is a pipe dream. We could be doing something very, very different. We do have this £126 billion creative sector. Help us create something which is very unique and for the UK, like a creator large language model. Imagine the BBC doing something for the good of humanity. This could be absolutely enormous. Again, doing it properly and not just kowtowing to the high techs. So next week we have the third reading of that bill. The government is tabling a number of what they're calling concessions, and this is what I've been following up overnight. The biggest concession is probably to avoid a judicial review. So they went into this consultation with their preferred option. There's been 11,000 responses to the consultation. They are still minded to go along with that, as far as I can see. They say their minds are open, but I haven't seen anything that suggests that they're still not thinking they're going to do it. But what they didn't do is they didn't conduct an impact assessment, and they're now offering one. Now, that could take a long time to actually get off the ground. They're also offering concessions around something called transparency. So what the creators are wanting to know is, has my content actually been scraped? We know that with the Meta scraping of the 7.5 million books in the LibGen dataset, thanks to Alex Reisner at The Atlantic. So you can go to that search engine, find out if your book's been scraped. But that's all creators have got. They've got no means of knowing, has my book, has my life's work been scraped, other than their publisher maybe telling them that we think it has. Or maybe a publisher doing a deal with an AI, but not actually telling their authors. And that's what the core readership of Charting Gen AI is about, which is people are being ripped off left, right, and center by the AI companies, but also by major publishers who said there'd be royalties to come. Authors have seen no royalties whatsoever. No one knows how these deals work. There is a pay as a large language model. So that's what we've got coming up next week. So I say I'm not going to spill the beans too much, but I've got some great quotes from Baroness Kidron. I've got some great quotes from the BPI, the music industry. They're absolutely incensed with all of this, and hoping to speak also to it's local election results day here, so she's a bit busy last night. But Victoria Collins MP, who is leading the charge for the Lib Dems in the House of Commons, who's tabling her own set of amendments, which essentially is trying to reinsert the Kidron amendments into that bill.
Just for people who are not in the UK, so Kidron's in the Lords, which is a bit like the Senate. Peter Kyle and the government are in the general kind of House of Parliament, the Commons, which is a bit like Congress. And
it's where the poor people are.
It's where and the people actually doing the consultation are like the patent office. So the people who ended up having to do it's quite amusing. They've never had 11,000 responses to anything. They're normally like doing a patent because Ricky Sutton's invented some new kind of widget to open whiskey bottles, and somebody wants a patent. Somebody wants a patent granted.
Important tool.
Yeah, but it ended up they ended up sort of carrying the can for this. So will be interesting to see what comes back. But this is the government negotiating slightly with itself. The other thing that's on the table, which wasn't when this consultation started a year ago, is the trade talks. So it's pretty obvious that this kind of loosening of digital regulation is on the table. It's obvious that they're trying to conclude. They've said they're trying to conclude a kind of US-UK trade deal before May the 19th, I think. So, there's no transparency coming out of the government in terms of what exactly is on the table, which is sort of understandable because it's a negotiation. You don't generally do that in public, very well. So you can kind of understand why it is. But it does feel like potentially what could come out of that is, hey, look, we've already accepted watering down digital regulations in order to, keep out the chlorinated chicken and keep tariffs on cars down. In those talks, the kind of copyright, which for us is a sort of existential protection, is a bargaining chip alongside a whole bunch of other things that could be traded. Interesting times in the UK.
Yeah, both countries have got their AI action plans alongside this. So Trump sent out a request for contributions to what should go in the US AI action plan. And hey presto, the high tech said, we just want to scrape at will. We don't even want, declare fair use is a legal settled result to all those cases. That will stop the 40 cases in the States in their tracks. And that would then give Trump and the administration the opportunity to then say that copyright regimes anywhere in the world are unfair to our big, beautiful AI companies, and you've got to loosen them. So you're absolutely right, Chris. This is probably going to be another trade-off, and we could be entering, and it's something for the conversation, if that happens, we could be entering a post-copyright era.
Okay. I'm going to jump in because I don't give a shit about any of that. I just don't. I understand the politics and I understand the noise and I understand the profit motive. Okay. I also understand how the big tech guys work and they don't give a shit about whether there's a law or not. And we talk a lot, Chris and I, in our conversations here about how laws are squishy. I hear that word all the time. This law is squishy. It's not fucking squishy. It's a law. Okay. It's got hundreds of years of history sitting behind it, thousands and thousands of different decisions. It's there for a reason. It is a learned wisdom. It's not squishy. So let's kill squishy as a word. The other thing is these gray areas. I keep hearing about gray areas. If you leave a gray area for a tech company that requires them to be either honest, fair, or transparent, all three of those things will definitely fail. And they will take a horse and cart through your gray and they'll let you know that it's worked really well for them when they write their next $1 trillion of market cap. So fuck that, right? That is just not a game that the world can play. So I was on a podcast last week and we were talking about COSA, it's another American law. It's the Kids Online Safety Act. It's the most obvious thing in the goddamn world. It's like, if you're going to run a social media network, could you please do it in a way that doesn't lead kids to commit suicide? And my question to the people and the lawmakers on the call was, why do we need a law for that? That kind of feels like a given to me. It feels like just a societal norm should be that we don't try to kill the people using our products. That doesn't seem to be a terribly good idea. I understand the cigarette industry, but then we made that illegal. Are we basically saying that we're now in a new industry where harm is the business model? And if it is, then maybe we should get rid of that, right? And so anyway, I was having this conversation and I kept getting all of this stuff back. This all ties together to what you were saying, Graham. So they were saying to me, fair use. And I'm like, I don't care. And they were like, yeah, the First Amendment. I'm like, don't give a shit about that either. And then they were like, yeah, but these are really important. I go, they are to America. And I need to remind you that you're only 4% of the global population. You're one fucking country and a diminishing one. So why do we care? And so, we are at a point, and again, Graham, to what you were saying earlier, where individual nations will ultimately build their own LLMs. They will. It's an inevitability. And it's also the case that publishers are going to start to remove their content from the open web because if it doesn't make them any money, they're not going to put it there. And so what we're going to see is a slow diminishment of the open web as we know it. So effectively, Web 1.0, if you want to think about it like that, is ending. Because AI either facilitates a widespread thievery to create Web 1.1, or we just go, this isn't fucking working, blow it up and build Web 2.0. And so I think we're headed towards a splinter net. So we have a situation already that in the South Sea Islands here, they have already banned Facebook, not by saying to people you can't use it, but by turning it off at a DNS level. You just can't get it. If you try and
Really?
log on to Facebook.com, doesn't work. You try and log on to Instagram, takes you nowhere. To redirects you. If you try and do it on your mobile app, it will disable the app. Right? So it's happening, right? And so I just think that if we're going to work on squishy and we're going to work on grey and we're going to work on trust after 5 years of failure, people aren't going to put up with it. And my final word to that podcaster that I was doing the thing with the other day was, I know you're asking me to wait for America to fix COSA. It passed 90-3 in the Senate and then got turned down because Meta lobbied it out, right? If you think the rest of the world is going to wait while their kids die for your silly politicians to figure this out, you are kidding yourself. Okay. And I feel it's going to be the same way with AI. I think it's going to be affirmative action.
But you saw this week the Meta AI chatbot, but basically chatting sexual to kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a very easy example, but to your point, Ricky, that how many years have we been talking about the grey area around age verification and its First Amendment right for anonymity, and in any country where it's become a law, it's been done, pretty sharpish straight after. But that's a good example for me of where, can anybody really argue ethically that is something that should be allowed? But when you listen to all of the spokespeople, the kind of the people that get wheeled out from Meta to talk about what they're doing about it, there's no shame in that, and it's just this is just a necessary kind of learning process from progress. And by the way, we need to go faster. And actually, we're creating our own AI app, and. So I agree with you that it's not. We are waiting, and we've waited an awfully long time for the law to catch up with the reality of what's happening on the ground. But the world is always 3, 4, 5 years ahead of where the law can get to, and that's the great frustration of trying to kind of, of working in an unethical world and trying to hope that the law is going to come in and save you.
But when we've created if we've created a profit motive for these companies and told them that they're rewarded by their size, not by their quality, then we facilitate and enable that. And so, often I get told, we need to evolve the solution. Yeah. I'm like, how's that going? Because I seem to be considerably older than I was when we first had this conversation, and nothing has changed. In fact, it's got worse. And so, we see every single day there's another scandal of somebody doing something. Yeah, we've now got a guy from Apple accused of lying directly to a judge under oath and potentially facing criminal action for that. Every week we sit down, Chris, I haven't got enough things to talk about because there's so many new scandals. Go on, Graham.
Which are great. I mean, in terms of those cases that we're covering, the three of us, what's going on in the court cases, the evidence has been given. I guarantee you that everyone that I followed on the way to my office this morning will not be aware of any of that. Affirmative action, the precursor to that, what's required is everyone to understand what's going on. And that may need some really, really big scandals, some harrowing, heartbreaking examples of what's going on here. We're starting to see some of them in the States, but they're fragmented. There's the shocking case of the teen that died by suicide through the character AI conversation he was having with supposedly Daenerys Targaryen, who said, I can't wait to meet you in the afterlife. And so he killed himself. And I spoke to an audience in upstate New York about this, and I actually broke down on stage because I immediately thought about my daughter, teenager, and her teenage friends. And in America, there's this crisis of loneliness, both from the young end and the elderly end as well. But no one tells them that these bots, these large language models, as you say, Ricky, they're designed for profit, but the actual technology that runs them is, it's grossly irresponsible. It's hugely unreliable. They exploit human vulnerabilities and human frailties. They try to pretend, and people get sucked in and lured into thinking they're speaking to a human because they learn all these little phraseologies, these little intonations. And it's scary as hell, but I don't think we're going to get there where society essentially sorts this mess out unless Chris can go to his MP, Clive Jones, and Clive said, yeah, I totally agree with you, Chris. Isn't it terrible? Only last week X happened. At the moment, we are having to do the education bit, and I don't know how long this phase has to go on for. and we're doing it in really, I love the way that my Substack's gone. It's been brilliant. It's a year old tomorrow, but it's tiny. It's pinprick stuff. We need some global reaction to this, but I think we are going to have to end up seeing these scandals and even bigger things. Things that are starting to appear in generative video, the interior of people's homes, images of dead relatives. I mean, some horrible things are going to come out. And then people say, oh my God, I didn't realize that.
So Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO and widely considered by many as the greatest mind of Silicon Valley, was doing a podcast recently. And he was asked about, when it will change, because he suddenly had, he's writing a book, funnily enough, about it. It's funny, but that seems to have helped him clear his mind on the fact that, maybe tech's doing bad things. And he said, look, the simple fact of the matter is that the law's not going to change, sadly, until something absolutely enormous and terrible happens that's so upsetting for everybody that it changes the world's view. And I'm just sitting there thinking, you caused it, buddy. Yeah, you were a very significant architect of this. So you will have your bloodstained hands all over that when that event occurs. And then you're going to say, see, I told you we should have done something about it. You can't have it both ways, you see. And so you think that we don't do, we're too small to make a difference, Graham. I disagree. I think that incisive, fearless, aggressive if necessary reporting that goes to the absolute heart of it, that calls BS on this stuff, right? Which is what this podcast is about. Gets to people, and you have to get to decision makers. And every major revolution starts with a small groundswell that becomes a momentum, that becomes a tide, that becomes a tidal wave, that becomes change. And so when I started my newsletter, it's going to be 2 years for me. Third year beginning in July this year. I did it for 5 mates. Yeah. And there's 15,000 people in there now. And 80% of them are C-suite executives at media companies all over the world. And there are over 200 regulators and governments in there. There are over 1,000 subscribers from Google in there. Okay. So you got to ask, well, why? Why would they be there? What are they trying to find out? I think what they lack is real, proper, deep, considered, researched journalism. Not noise, not reactions, not knee-jerk, not 3 paragraphs in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, proper deep dives into the numbers and into the details. And when they see that, it helps them make their decisions. And if you do it twice a week, 3 times a week, and you do it all the time. I'm in London next week with Chris on stage, talking to a whole load of people in London about it. I'm in New York 2 weeks after that, talking to 300-400 people about it there. They're all C-suite media executives. 3 people from the DOJ are coming. It's only us, I get it. But if you whisper in enough powerful ears, that's how change happens. You don't need everybody in the world to try and change it. You just need the people that can change it to appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. And I do agree with that. I mean, when we have to continue, as I say, it's mission-led what I'm doing. I can't stop it. I've started something now. And I mean, something I should mention, which is, my audience is very much on that creator end of this, individual creators, individual illustrators, special effects people, all over the world, but largely Europe, UK, and US. And when I send up my newsletter or when I do some things on LinkedIn, I get personal messages coming back. And some of the stories they're harrowing. It's individuals that I lost my job 6 months ago. I trained for 7 years to be an X, and now I can no longer do it. And is there any advice you have for me, or what should I be doing? And so I've turned that around now to Creators Fight Back, and there's lots of things that we can be doing. And then the other point you made, Ricky, about journalism as well. I think our own industry, journalism has done a really bad job at explaining this story. Every single bloody story has to be accompanied by, yet again, a blue brain or a robot hand or a robot touching what would it be, a chalkboard or something. It's this idea of a shiny metallic future, when in reality it's people cheating in exams. It's going into a room looking very clever because they've just looked something up on ChatGPT. And we always go to this thing as well in all the interviews with people like Schmidt. We always talk about the existential threat, the artificial general intelligence, when's it going to take over, all that stuff, and not the harms, not the how it hurts. So I talk about how it helps, how it hurts, how it harms, and we all know. And don't get me wrong, I do use it. I love it. There's some amazing things going on in this technology, but as long as it's being done, safely, responsibly, ethically, and it's coming. It is coming. Smaller, more bespoke models trained ethically on data sets with consent. It is coming, and there may well be sovereign LLMs and all that sort of stuff.
But why do you think it's not been covered that well? Because I contrast it with something like I don't know whether it's a good analogy or not, but I contrast it with something like COVID, which I thought some of the kind of journalistic work on all of the kind of meaning behind it and what was happening and what the impacts were and all the rest of it. I thought journalism did a pretty good job of that. I think, it realized that it was something that was so big that it had to get covered in enormous depth.
Yeah.
I don't sense that with that. I kind of sense AI as if you go through the sort of the articles being published by the major organizations. Part of that, I think, I'll have my go first, and then you can tell me what you think. But part of that, I think, is because within large publishing organizations, there is always a neophyte wing that are desperate to sort of be forward-thinking, technology literate, moving forward. And if AI is the next thing, then that must be a good thing. And so we can report on it, but we shouldn't seem to be pushing back on it, because that's a Luddite reaction. That's a kind of that makes us printies and inkies and the people who resist change. And I wonder whether there's some element of that in it, but I don't think it is getting covered in anywhere near the depth that it should do.
Yeah, I think just explaining that the concept of AI has been around for 70 years, and we've been using this for 30 years at scale before generative AI came along. It's the difference between what is otherwise known as predictive or narrow AI that we've all used for Netflix recommendations. It's in my watch, it's in my phone I'm using to do this. All the good AI, the classic AI, is when AI is then used to actually create material, create content. That it's taken this sideways move, and that the fact that as I said at the beginning, that the large language models and the transformer models within those, the fact that all these things can do is look for patterns and produce results based on probability to create plausibly accurate content, not actually accurate content. It's an output that's plausibly correct, which is why you always have to check everything. Those three things, if we were just to explain to people in journalism that the reason why you need to check all this stuff is that the models are designed for plausible accuracy. It's not a data set. I mean, again, all this stuff, lawyers going into courts and being called out by judges because their research is all based on ChatGPT. There are now 6 well-known cases of this, but think of all the other industries where these things aren't being reported. They're reported because journalists are in courtrooms. Think of all the industries where people are getting caught out because they've just taken something on face value from ChatGPT. And so when I take journalists through this, I have 8 key things you need to know. And so within that are these, don't get caught out yourselves. And the key thing there is that key sense of don't trust anything from it, and why you can't trust it, because of the bias, hallucinations, because it's not designed for accuracy.
Yeah,
that's the key thing. It's not designed to actually give you the right answer.
Can I offer my insight on why I don't think it's been well covered in the media? I think it's about money. So I think that, it's very clear. I'm on stage next week with Stephanie Laser, who gave evidence for, she was News Corp's programmatic advertising person. She gave evidence in the search antitrust trial, and she basically said that her business, News Corp, was held hostage by Google because if they tried to move off the platform, it would cost them so much money they'd be effectively over as a company. And when she asked for additional services, they laughed at her and told her to stop being emotional. Exact words. I'll fucking show you emotion next week in New York. So she and I are on stage and we're going to be talking about this, right? And then straight after that, Matthew Wheatland from the Daily Mail in New York testified, and he basically said that it's suffocated our journalism, our ability to be able to cover the news and the ability to be at places, hire journalists and pay journalists disappeared because they promised us money that they never gave us, and it almost killed our business. So I think this is about money. I think that if those two things are true, and they both testified under oath, so I suspect they're true, and I don't know them both, so I know it's true. Okay. This is about the fact that 80% of publishers rely on Google for their traffic, and 80% of publishers rely on Google for their income, their advertising income. And so if you go after that company and they take away your traffic and they take away your income, then you don't have a company. And I think that we've actually gotten to the point where we've allowed the invaders to basically take over our industry. And the industry ultimately, even now with everything happening, is so locked in a cycle of Stockholm syndrome that it's completely lost its ability to see it fairly. And so what it requires to get back on its feet is for people it knows, respects, likes, listens to step out from the comfort of a job and go and sit on the sidelines and shout from the bleachers and show them there's a better way. That's our job, right?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Good. So there we go. Solved it. So let's just talk about, go back to fair use for a moment?
Mm-hmm.
So fair use is this crazy American idea, as we were discussing earlier on, about the idea that normal copyright doesn't apply in America. It's only fair use. So fair use is different. You can use anything you want and ignore copyright as long as you make a larger industry out of the thing you're using it for. What a classic piece of American muddleheaded nonsense. But that makes sense to them, right? The interesting thing is, though, is that fair use is a uniquely US doctrine. And this is a question for you, Graham. Every single time I get up in Denmark recently, in France, to the UN, people say to me all the time, Ricky, what about fair use? And I go, it's not your law, is it? And they go, well, no, but, and you go, well, there is no but. Do you have the death penalty? No, you don't, do you? Do you allow guns in your schools? No, you don't. America does that as well. This is an American law. You're not held to it. In fact, every single time this happens in your country, your law's being broken billions of times a day, and you're doing nothing about it. How are you held hostage to this by an American doctrine that's 30 years old and built for a previous era, and somehow you've allowed it to happen? And then they say, well, what do we do about it? I'm going, have a word with the judge. Start there. Well, what am I missing? Why is that not happening?
It's because that narrative, Ricky, has been used by the high techs for probably decades now to justify what they've been doing. And that has permeated around the world with this sense, okay, so they're talking about that. And they use it. So when Satya Nadella is on the stage in London or giving an interview to the Times podcast, he'll say it's fair use. And again, the journalistic ignorance around this doesn't understand. Okay, well, that he must be right then. That fair use must be a thing. So that's fine. I won't probe him on that. They don't then come back to that's only applies in America, Satya. And there are four key things that you need to prove. You need to prove that you're doing on the right side of those four key things. But the most important being, is it a commercial exploitation? Absolutely. And then the fourth one is, does it harm the market or the potential market? It's that substitutive thing. The thing in the New York Times case, which is so well illustrated, but it's also in the Ziff Davis case this week, where they compare and contrast. Here's the piece in the New York Times, and here's the ChatGPT output. Now, OpenAI said that was the result of elaborate prompting, and you wouldn't use those incredibly elaborate prompts to actually generate a verbatim output. Yes, you would. If you wanted to get that one New York Times story and you weren't prepared to pay for a full subscription, I would use every single means I knew to try and get that one story if I needed it and I wasn't prepared to pay. So that's not a defense. But again, that's written up as, OpenAI got a point here, haven't they?
Yeah, but this is an exact corollary to me of the sort of meta of defense for years about harms in child sexual exploitation, which is, yes, we understand it's bad, but the numbers are really tiny. And, we can't stop everything. And therefore, it's better to let everything happen rather than really spend a lot of time worrying about that. It's this sort of idea that there's a margin of error. I don't buy that for a minute. But to go back to your explanation of fair use, I think one of the problems with it is it sounds like fair use sounds like anything is fair use. And that isn't what the fair use doctrine actually says. It says you can do it for sort of medical research, scientific research. Right. You can't take it and transform it into something commercial, as you said. So it's almost like the words themselves make it sound like it's fair game. That's absolutely not what the fair use, sort of doctrine actually says. And that's why there's 40 court cases of people saying, calling bull on it and saying, no, let's go to court and we can walk you through what transformative means, what commercial exploitation means. It's a great example this week, which is, I think these things are becoming clearer, Ricky, so part of it is it's becoming clearer as the product roadmaps from the AI companies begins to be clearer. So OpenAI launched this week a shopping e-commerce application, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the conversations we were having a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, was, when we're talking about scraping for LLMs, we said this will eventually compete with publishers. No, it's nothing to do with that. This is kind of, we take it off, we put it into a large lab full of people in white coats, and we do something wonderful, and we never really use your content. And we said at some point this will be a competition for consumers' attention. It will be a competition for time, and it will be a competition that goes directly into areas that are currently served by commercial publishers. So this week, OpenAI launched an e-commerce, what would you call it? Set of answers. So you can now shop, integrated with Shopify, integrated with Google's kind of shopping tools. So you can feed into it an e-commerce cart. I can ask, hey, what is the best cappuccino maker for me to buy? And it will give me a list, and it will let me go and buy it. Yeah. That is a direct commercial competitor.
100%.
It's just a consumer product. This is not a scientific wonder. This is just an e-commerce technological advance.
Yeah, Chris, I need to throw something in here, actually, because you just reminded me of something really important. So I see another danger on the horizon, which is that all the five major tech companies that we're worried about are all facing an antitrust trial. So Google's had 3 and lost all 3, so they're toast, right? Technically. Then you've got Meta's in one now, Apple's up next, okay, then Amazon, then Microsoft, okay? So all 5 of these tech companies that represent $14.7 trillion worth of value and nearly 40% of the total value of the US stock market, okay, are all facing breakup or antitrust. These guys have been fighting each other tooth and nail for ages, right? Now, I remember some stuff, actually, it takes me back to the Daily Mail. I remember sitting in meetings with the Daily Mail back in the day where I was at News Corp and we were having a conversation with the Mail, and the response was, we're going to build a football mag. And you guys were like, we were thinking of doing something around shopping. And you were like, okay. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So we're all going to agree to have our territory. And for the first kind of generation of AI, I saw everybody separate, so Meta went this way, OpenAI went that way, Google went this way, everybody went this way and that way, right? But what I'm now seeing, and where the real danger is that they're all deciding to do deals with each other. So in the court case yesterday, in the Google remedy case yesterday, Sundar Pichai was only too happy to tell everybody that he's about to do a deal for AI to integrate it into iPhones. And he's already got his search in the iPhone, and OpenAI's already got a deal in the iPhone as well. And so it's only a matter of time before another AI decides. Perplexity suddenly finds it's in Android. And then all of these people have then got a little bit of each, but they're all buttressing each other so that when you try and break up one, they all go, but if you break us, you're going to break all of those people over there. Look at the damage you're going to cause. You can almost see the islands trying to become a nation state. Yeah. You can almost see that. That's the play. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just, it was really clear. The minute I saw that in the court, I thought, I know what that is.
Yeah. Yes. But actually, that you just hit on also that so we know that Google and Meta together is a 500 billion revenue, right? I've been thinking this week about basically we think that they peaked, right? Because their sort of usage is not growing organically anymore. They're going into the harvesting phase of kind of taking money out of the model. When you're in that many antitrust cases and you look like you're going to get broken up, it's the time to kind of move into the squeeze bit. But what's not clear yet is so Meta AI is launched as a separate app. It says, oh, by the way, it'd be great if you used all your Instagram and Facebook contacts, to kind of to power that. But we're starting to see, I think, the what I would describe as kind of the platform publishing era coming to an end, and it's moving to generative publishing. What isn't clear yet, there are only really 2 obvious models because there have been two models in publishing, for the last 50 years, which is you either go for subscriptions, which is, everyone's going to have a kind of concierge style chat friend that helps them through their day. And that can be, is that going to be a mass market direct to consumer subscription? The other option is it's an advertising model. And for me, that sort of makes my chest heave with dread, because everything that we've learned about algorithmic editing in the platform publishing era is if you optimize for advertising, terrible things happen to information, to knowledge, to democracy, to safety, to all of the things that you would expect. And so, when you see kind of shopping coming through, when you see Perplexity, I think, has done a kind of custom ad deal with someone who's sat on the side of the Perplexity model. Sam Altman's talked about $20,000 subscriptions, but that's a B2B model, right? That's you pay $20,000 if you want to replace software engineers. That your classic man in the street is not going to pay $20,000 a year to have a ChatGPT kind of add-on. So that big decision, that's being made at the moment gradually, and sort of we're seeing that come out. That to me is the terrifying prospect, that with a 500 billion prize, as Facebook and Meta and Google kind of get broken up, and that comes up for grabs, that the decision is taken to say, well, as an AI company, I want to be an ad model. I think that should terrify us all.
So, sorry, Graham, and just jump in. I had a conversation this morning, actually, with someone very smart in this space about what do we do.
Before you got to us.
That's why I drink.
Yeah.
That's why I drink on here. I have to deaden the pain. No offense. No offense. We'll do it together in London next week, mate. You watch. But we were talking about what you do with advertising, and I just proposed, why don't we just have a must-carry rule for advertising as well? Why don't you say that, we've got a must-carry for content? Why wouldn't you have a must-carry for advertising? If the company is domiciled for tax in your country, and if the advertiser is domiciled for tax in your country, and the publisher is domiciled for tax in your country, which takes about 10 seconds to set up, right? Very easy for a government to pass a law that says, okay, well, 40 cents on the dollar has to remain within domestically tax domiciled companies. There's a must carry. A certain percentage of your ad must go here. That would facilitate and enable or solve for an awful lot of the things that are being discussed. Just a thought. But one thing I just wanted to ask you, Graham, is around the DOJ remedy, the one that doesn't really get an awfully talked about because, again, the journalists aren't really on their game in this. One of the remedies is to disentangle, to untie the rule that you have to be in search, you have to give your content for AI training. So they're saying that those should be two distinct things. So a publisher should be allowed to say to Google, I'm remaining in search, but you cannot use my content for AI, and you cannot disable my search for me saying that and making that decision.
Yeah.
A, do you think that's enforceable? B, do you think that that's an elegant solution?
I take it the other way around. I think it's an elegant solution. I don't see how it's enforceable in the same way that these chatbots change their name, change their identity all the time. Google could be scraping or acquiring data sets scraped by third parties on their behalf, and it wouldn't necessarily be Google doing the scraping. So there's a lot of other things to think through on that. Like all of these things, there's some very easily said phrases, but then what's it actually mean below the surface, and all these various permutations? It's so complicated. I mean, the big broad piece here is that search has gone, it's not going, it's gone generative. Search has gone generative. Yeah, so through the, every time I'm going now to Google, and whenever you look for something which is a comparison or the meaning of, you're going to get an AI overview. Now, I'm noticing that alongside some of those overviews, there are links in some of them. Again, who bothers to click on a link and an AI written summary, it's all there. But occasionally you're starting to see little logos. Some of those logos are getting slightly larger. Some of the publisher content, you get an image from something. Has a deal been done? Is this a beginnings of an SEO? How do you game? How do you, what's the SEO equivalent of an AI overview landscape? Is Google working on that with publishers, with anybody? very interestingly, Chris, with
Yeah.
OpenAI, the Let's Go Shopping with ChatGPT, they were quite carefully saying this is not an ad. Why are they saying that? This is an experiment. Almost no money was was exchanged. It's not a commercial thing yet. But of course, they could carry on that for 2 or 3 years. You completely skew the market. You want to find something, go to ChatGPT. That's the way you find stuff, and then they start to commercialize it.
In some ways, I do worry that so OpenAI is still going through its kind of not for profit to profit conversion, isn't it? So for everyone who doesn't worry about that, they started out as a not for profit with the mission. I think it's a beautifully written mission about using AI for the good of humanity.
Yes.
Then looked at the capex bill and went, Jesus, I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure we can really stomach that. We better change.
Jesus was really poor as well, by the way, mate. Lived in sandals and all that kind of stuff. Same thing.
So they just stump up the capex bill.
Before the Catholic Church worked it out and turned it into money. But other than that, same thing.
Other than that. So they decided that they were going to be for profit, and they're going through this kind of this process, which is to convert the company to a for-profit company. Now, the pattern that we've seen a lot of times with sort of venture capital funded digital companies is you keep the revenue model off the table until you build the audience. So you go hell for leather to build habit, to build audience, to build destinations, to build all the things that you need. And then at the point that you have kabillions of people using your service, and OpenAI said this week, we've got 1 billion people kind of using ChatGPT. You turn the revenue on late, by which point you're the winner takes all in the market. And, that's when the gravy really starts to kind of to flow. And so I actually think this kind of not-for-profit to profit conversion is it allows them to say, well, the shopping's an experiment. We're not making money from it because we're just, we're humble servants of AGI. But the mask will come off at some point.
The same excuse they're using for allowing imagery in the style of. So we will allow imagery in the style of a particular studio, be it Studio Ghibli or The Simpsons, etc. We're not actually reproducing or replicating an individual image, but of course they are, because those little videos are based on elements and fragments taken from copyrighted information. But yeah, it's the same thing. And before you know it, if you want to find out what's on the latest Disney sort of Marvel movie, you go to ChatGPT, and Disney will have had to have done some sort of deal with OpenAI, because that's the way you're going to find it. The other key thing which is coming through the trials as well, and another thing which they've all been announcing recently, is the AI companies becoming really interested in running their own browsers. So it's another data scrape, data capture.
They're just building another web. They're just building another web. They're just building another one. So, all right. So given that we're living in a Black Mirror episode in an alternate reality, okay, we're living it in real life. Okay. Let me throw you a really radical idea, because this hour's flown past, right? But here's a really radical idea that Chris and I have spoken to about a couple of times on here. Graham, I'm really interested in your view. Imagine for a moment that all the world's publishers that publish on the open web suddenly discover that publishing on the open web is no longer commercially viable. I think every publisher in the world is about 5 to midnight on that realization. So the open web is no longer commercially viable. Okay, let's say that's the deal. So then you go, well, would I still print newspapers if they cost me £500 a newspaper? The answer is no, you wouldn't. So you wouldn't then do paper. So you don't have to be on the open web. That's a choice. And that industry, that basically that business is ending. So now a lot of publishers are thinking, well, hang on a minute, maybe my future is in some kind of syndication or some kind of licensing future. Maybe I am the press association for the whole world, or this or that. Well, that's fine, but then you do deals. You're always going to get the worst end of the deal from whichever company you do a deal with, because they've got all the money and all the momentum, and you're just there at the table. So it's a terrible negotiating tactic. We've talked about that before, Chris. So why wouldn't the publishers do this, Graham? Why would the publishers not remove all their content from the open web, put it all into an LLM of their own, make one AI company, and say, if all the world's premium publishing content lives in this one place, we are the fucking Harrods of the web. And if you want to come play, it's expensive, okay? But we're all in here, and we will control our distribution. We will control our future. We will control the discovery. We'll build our own browser. Thanks. We'll build our own search engine. Thanks. We'll build our own AI tools and we'll build our own chatbots. Okay. And you will be able to have a conversation about what stock picks you're going to decide in conversation with the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. Yeah. I see value in that. What it would need to do, and I've spoken to God knows how many publishers about this, they always say, yeah, but then you'd have to herd the cats. And I'm like, the cats are going extinct. So it's either herd up or like don't. So Graham, my question to you is, you've worked in journalism. Chris, you've worked in journalism. I've worked in journalism. There's people all on this line who have all worked in journalism, right? Why would you not just do that? Is this not the moment to make a radical decision and just go, do you know what? We're just going to have to own our own destiny.
So I was heavily involved in this, Ricky, in the early days of the web revolution. So from about 93 to 96, and all the feverish experimentation taking place both at Teletext and within the Daily Mail group as well. So I was aware of, if not directly, I was one of the directors of what became was then known as the Associated Electronic Publishing, which also became the publisher of Mail Online. So yeah, I was involved in all those early discussions around. We knew that classified was going to evaporate. It's all going to go online. It's going to become searchable. It would leave the portal of an individual brand, and there was a much bigger game to be played if we coalesced and aggregated classified advertising around properties, cars, and there was all these initiatives like Fish for Cars, Fish for Jobs, and
I remember.
cross company things. What happened to all of those? And really understand that, I've been in those meetings as well. Maybe you're in them, where people would go along with it, but they've come to the point where people would peel away and do their own thing, or they would see it as it's associated really to be trusted on this. And of course we wanted to be the best. We knew there had to be something at scale. And you had, be a telco or a techie would then pick off another one of the companies and say, no, just do something with us. And that's what happened. So we get through to 2000, 2001. None of those things achieved the scale that they ever really deserved to have. And it didn't happen because the collaboration was not genuine. It wasn't effective. I can't see, I've been out of that world for a long time, but I don't see the great desire, not only in our, in the publishing space. There could be a public service broadcaster LLM. If we can't even get a public service broadcaster single video player, they've each got, BBC iPlayer, ITV Play, all these other things. They can't really even understand how to federate properly around that. So how are they going to do that with LLMs? I do see various subsectors coming up with those LLMs. So I do see, photographers doing their own, because they're going to be really hard hit. And using smaller, more bespoke, ethically trained open source models, that could be the way forward. I was with a company earlier this week. They're thinking of doing exactly that. And it's quite low cost. Again, it's who do we turn to? How do we get advice from this?
I hope that the lessons maybe have been learned. I was at News Corp 2010, 2012, when exactly the same conversation, which is this is the beginning of this is a sort of launch of the iPad. And should publishers all come together and create kind of one aggregator publishing tool? And I would say almost the same reaction, which is, this is a really good idea, but we wish you hadn't had it. We basically, if you own it, then we feel like maybe we don't really want to join it, and it fizzled. I would say there's a massive difference in the publishing industry's appreciation that we are not each other's enemy. I think there's a much greater sense. I would say that the conversations that are happening 15 years later, you'd be pretty stupid not to have realized that, but I think they are different. I still think we've talked about this at length with you. I still think there isn't a clear, no one will allow someone from the industry to lead the industry, and there's no clear third party that's doing it, because you go and try and get venture capital funding to be a kind of challenger, publisher friendly challenger brand to the kind of capex laden platforms is a difficult conversation. But that's I'd say the will is moved along, the execution possibly not.
Be interesting to see next week. Maybe this is a question we should ask the audience next week, Chris, just to try and get a sense check as to just how far they are. Because my main lesson with all of the 20 or 30 media CEOs that are in my newsletter, and the emails and the conversations I have, I've been to almost every continent that hasn't got snow on it, really, to talk to these media CEOs. They all say the same things, and it always ends with them saying, yeah, we'll do that. And then 2 weeks later coming back with a kind of, and my response to them has now become the same, which is, so you're going to fail your way to success, are you? Is that the plan? Is that the model? Why don't we discuss that with your board? I'll come in and I'll help you understand that failing your way to success works really, really well, and see how your board and investors feel about that. Yeah, let's have that chat. Yeah,
for all the consultants on the call, I wouldn't recommend this approach.
No, but it's the reality. Okay, and if the answer is that we've just decided it's too hard to win, then just don't be there. Just get out of the road. You're the wrong boss. And I think that ultimately, again and again and again, in all these conversations I have with all these different people on all these different continents, with all these different challenges, always ends with the fact that we've got the wrong management for this era. We've got the management of people that you talk about. You've got the harvesting management, the people that take mature businesses and then have to extract as much money as they can from an existing business that's in decline. I'm trying to manage a declining business and profit as much as I can on the way down. We don't have any management that say our job is actually to reverse the decline and go back to growth, which means new ideas. We have evolution and end of life management, not growth or revolution or evolution or any kind of moving forward. And that requires new management, right?
But I always like to end these things on a high, Ricky. So
that was a high. I was applying for the job.
My hope is that some of the antitrust decisions will basically allow people to think differently. I still think that there is a kind of a 20-year kind of gap between people really understanding there's a competitive open web, there are advertising choices to be made, there are publishing decisions to be made. There is a kind of status quo that has sort of descended and become much more oppressive than it was at the start. A few different places where I think that changes, and it will start to kind of rekindle innovation. It is one of the core reasons why you end up in antitrust, is because you've effectively chilled the kind of innovative desires of the market that you operate in. So I'm very optimistic that will come. It won't come quick enough for our liking, but it will come.
Just on the optimism, I also talk when I'm towards the end of my, because you can't leave an audience on an absolute low. Obviously, you've got to give them that optimistic vision for the future. But I genuinely mean that, what we are living through now, from a creator perspective, from the creative industries perspective, really fantastic, pungent, critically acclaimed content punching through, amid a sea of dross of AI slop, which is generic, it's derivative, it has no soul, it has no heart. Audiences are spotting that. Audiences are spotting that this content is not real. Phrases like, this isn't real music, I couldn't ever actually see that band, I can't get emotionally attached with these lyrics because no one's actually felt those experiences. And that's what's coming through. So we're going to live through this period of 3 to 5 years of chaos and hell. Jobs will be lost. We'll learn how to do new things, just as we did with Web 1.0. And maybe, and this is the optimistic vision, there will be a renaissance of really creative ways of doing things. Films made with real stunt people, real, real flames and real fast cars, because there'll be some art forms that will come through and say, my God, like the adolescence phenomenon on Netflix. Once you get, as someone from the TV industry, this is all taken in one shot. Once you've actually got into the actual narrative and you think, my God, this is such superb acting, brilliant casting, great direction, all of it. The whole thing is fantastic, and I don't think AI is ever going to get there. So audiences, consumers, if we do this literacy thing, if we constantly point out, but it's not real, it's has no heart, has no soul. It's not a phrase. These are phrases that people are using on YouTube when bands put up an AI video, etc. There hopefully will be this renaissance of creator-led, of human-first content, and we'll learn to coexist with all this stuff. But at the moment, there is this lurch to, isn't it great, isn't it fantastic, and it's full of all these problems.
All right, well, I'm not really in the optimism phase. I'm in the baseball bat phase. So I am. I'm going to let you guys be optimistic, and I'm going to take a baseball bat. But I will point out one irony that's just occurred to me when I was listening to you two talking. Then is that the only way to get back to trust, is to win at antitrust. So, so we actually have to win antitrust to win back trust. That's the mission.
Yeah. That's a headline stored away, Ricky, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm going to put that in the bank and save it for later. Gentlemen, I really, really appreciate you joining. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on the line. That's a new record, by the way. So excellent job. Paul Hood, your timing's absolutely dreadful, mate, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to see you next week. Mate, get a watch. Get one of them. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for all your time, everybody. We will catch you again. Same time. Is it the same time next week? Because I'm in London. I'm doing this on the road.
We're a bit later next week. I think we're might be 10 or something in the morning. So
10 in the morning UK time.
UK time. So
are we doing it live from Condé Nast?
City time. We're doing it live from the Condé Nast building, which will be exciting.
We're so fancy. We're so fancy these days. Started off as two of our mates, and now look where we are. We're going on the road. We're going international. Graham, thanks so much for joining us, mate. Keep up the great work. I read every post. Keep it up. Thank you, and see you later, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.